The crystal stem of my wine glass trembled in my hand, but my face stayed still. The room was golden, lit by chandeliers dripping like frozen fire, and all eyes were on me. Then came the blade. My mother stood, her velvet dress brushing the chair, her lips painted in a shade too cruel for family gatherings. She raised her glass, as though to toast, and with a voice rich and sharp as broken glass, she cut me down in front of everyone. "We've decided to cut you out of the inheritance. You've never deserved it." Gasps flickered across the table, quickly drowned in laughter. My uncles chuckled as though this humiliation were a clever joke. My cousins exchanged smirks, eyes bright with mockery. Even my father, silent as stone, nodded in agreement. And me? I smiled. Lifted the wine to my lips, swallowed the bitterness with a practiced grace. My name is Emily Carter. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? The violins played on, mocking in their elegance, as if the orchestra were complicit in my undoing. I laid my napkin on the table, folded with precision, the way my mother once taught me as a child. "Excuse me," I said softly. The chair scraped back, the sound slicing through their laughter. I walked out, heels clicking, spine straight, as though dignity were armor. No one stopped me. Not a single hand reached for mine. Outside, the night was cold enough to sting. I gripped the steering wheel of my car until my knuckles turned white. Inside me, grief twisted into something darker, sharper. A seed planted. They thought they'd written the ending of my story. But betrayal has a way of becoming fuel. Because when your own family decides you don't deserve a place at the table, sometimes the only revenge is burning the table down. 2 days later, the fire began. Sleep didn't come that night. Or the next. My body lay still, but my mind replayed the dinner over and over like a cruel film on repeat. My mother's smirk. My father's silence. The laughter that rang louder than any symphony. By morning, rage had sharpened into clarity. If they saw me as nothing, I would show them how much nothing could take away. I opened my laptop. Pulled up files, documents, things I'd quietly tucked away during years of working in the family business. They thought I was naive, unimportant, just a daughter they could parade at holidays and dismiss in boardrooms. What they didn't realize was how carefully I had been listening. How much I knew. Emails. Tax filings. Investments tied to names they'd buried under layers of lies. I had the keys to the kingdom because they never thought I'd use them. And now, I would. But revenge isn't loud at first. It starts in whispers. So I began small. A single call to our bank's compliance office, slipping in just enough to raise an eyebrow. A quiet note sent anonymously to an auditor about irregular transfers. Not lies, truths. Truths they buried so deep they assumed no one would ever unearth them. As I pressed send, I felt the strangest calm. Like setting fire to a match in a room filled with gasoline. Still, a part of me hurt. These were my parents. The people who taught me to tie my shoes, to say, please, and thank you, to fold napkins neatly. But what do you do when those same hands strip you of dignity and laugh as you bleed? You stop calling them parents. You call them opponents. And I was ready for war. That afternoon, I drove past their mansion, the one with marble columns and manicured lawns. From the outside, it looked untouchable. But I knew the cracks, the hidden debts, the secrets wallpapered over with money. I parked across the street, watching as cousins and uncles filtered inside for another gathering, another performance of unity. I imagined them toasting again, replaying my humiliation like their favorite comedy. I smiled, just faintly, as I whispered to myself. Enjoy your show. The curtain's about to fall. That night, my phone buzzed. A private investigator I'd hired months ago, back when I still wondered if my parents were hiding something from me, sent over files. Photos. Transactions. A network of deceit that made my inheritance look like pocket change. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about power. And I finally realized, they feared me, even if they didn't admit it. That was why they cut me out. Why they tried to humiliate me into silence. But silence was the last thing I had left for them. 2 days after that dinner, the first domino tipped. My father's business account was frozen for routine investigation. The whispers started. The same relatives who laughed at me now called him in panic. And me? I sat on my apartment balcony, sipping coffee as dawn lit the horizon. For the first time in years, I felt the taste of control. Because the family that threw me out was about to find out how fast their empire could crumble. By the third day, the cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were fractures running through the polished marble of my family's empire, and I could hear the sound of it breaking. It started with whispers at the country club. My aunt, the one who always bragged about her diamonds being family heirlooms, called my mother in a frenzy. Someone told her the IRS was sniffing around. My mother brushed it off, but I knew that tone. She was rattled. I wasn't. I sat in my car outside the club, engine off, windows down, listening to birdsong while my phone lit up with updates from the investigator. Every file, every transaction, every shadow account I exposed was a thread they couldn't pull back once it unraveled. And it was unraveling fast. That night, I drove by their mansion again. The windows glowed, but the house didn't feel alive, it felt haunted. I parked in the same spot across the street, the one I had claimed as my watchtower, and I imagined what was happening inside. My parents, their perfect smiles cracking under pressure. My cousins, worried their future handouts might vanish. My uncles, suddenly questioning whether loyalty to my father was worth it. They were turning on each other. I didn't have to be in the room to feel it. Then came the call. Emily. It was my cousin Laura. Her voice trembled, something I had never heard before. Listen. I don't know what's happening, but Uncle John says the feds are looking into the company. Do you know anything about this? Her words hung there, desperate, like a child asking for comfort. I thought about that dinner. About her smirk when my mother cut me out. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, maybe the truth has a way of finding its way out. And hung up. For the first time, they were calling me, not to mock me, not to dismiss me, but because they were afraid. But fear wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted them to taste the loneliness they fed me all my life. To know what it meant to be isolated at the table, surrounded by family who saw you as nothing. The next morning, my investigator handed me something I didn't expect, proof of betrayal. Not against me, but between them. My father had been funneling money into an account my mother didn't know existed. Millions. She'd been parading her control, her cruelty, all while he was quietly undermining her. And suddenly, the game wasn't just me versus them. It was them versus each other. I sat with the papers spread across my coffee table, the sun rising through my blinds, painting everything in gold. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outcast. I felt like the conductor. And my family was the orchestra, each instrument trembling under my baton. I thought back to that night at the dinner table, their laughter ringing like a chorus. How strange, I thought, that laughter can turn so quickly into silence. And soon, into screams. The documents sat on my table like loaded weapons. My father's hidden account. My mother's ignorance. Proof of betrayal in their perfect little marriage. I didn't rush. Revenge isn't about speed, it's about precision. So I began with a whisper. A copy of the bank transfer, folded into an unmarked envelope, slipped into my mother's mailbox late at night. I imagined her finding it in the morning, eyes narrowing, blood running cold as she realized the man she trusted had carved his own escape tunnel. By noon, the first crack detonated. I knew it the moment my phone buzzed with a voicemail. It was her voice, sharp, shaking with fury. Emily. What do you know about this? Tell me you didn't, click. She couldn't even finish the sentence. I leaned back in my chair, let the silence swallow me, and smiled. That evening, I parked once again outside their mansion. This time, the glow in the windows was violent, shadows moving like a storm inside. My parents were fighting. Loud. Gestures sharp, voices raised, hands slicing the air. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I already knew. My father, cornered. My mother, betrayed. My family, splintering. I rolled down the window, the autumn wind curling in, and whispered, "Let it rot." But the chaos didn't stop there. My uncles called me the next day. They wanted to know if the rumors were true, if my father was siphoning money. They spoke in panicked voices, men who had spent decades fattening themselves on his power suddenly realizing they were tethered to a sinking ship. And for the first time, I didn't dodge their questions. Maybe you should ask my mother, I said. She seems to be learning a lot about him lately. Silence. Heavy, thick silence. Then a rushed goodbye. The dominoes were falling faster than I planned. That night, my cousin Laura texted me again. Emily, what are you doing to them? Mom says the whole family's about to lose everything. Please, if this is you, stop before it goes too far. Too far. I stared at her words, remembering the smirk she wore as she raised her glass the night they disowned me. They wanted me invisible. Disposable. Forgotten. Now I was unforgettable. The next day, news broke inside the family like a bomb. My father's offshore accounts had triggered a full-scale investigation. Half the assets were frozen. My mother's jewelry business, the one she flaunted as her personal empire, suddenly looked like collateral damage. And me? I walked through the city with my head high, a ghost reborn in flesh, watching strangers bustle past me with no idea that somewhere, in a gilded mansion, a dynasty was crumbling. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their reckoning. And I was only just beginning. The morning their empire hit the newspapers, I knew there was no turning back. Carter Investments under federal scrutiny for fraudulent accounts. The headline bled across the front page like an open wound. My father's name. My mother's company listed as potentially complicit. Their perfect reputation, dragged through mud for all of America to read. I bought 3 copies. Folded one carefully. Slid it into my journal like a pressed flower, a reminder of the day their pedestal crumbled. By noon, my phone lit up again. This time, not with relatives, but with reporters. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted my perspective. They smelled blood, and I let them. I gave one interview. Just one. Anonymous, but sharp enough to cut. I told them about the culture of arrogance. About the family dinners where cruelty was served alongside dessert. About a dynasty built on lies and silence. Not once did I say my name. I didn't need to. The truth carried its own voice. That night, my parents' mansion looked different. Fewer lights. Curtains drawn tight. Their fortress shrinking under shame. I sat across the street, engine off, watching. Wondering if they finally understood what it felt like to live in the shadows. But revenge wasn't just about their downfall, it was about dismantling the loyalty that protected them. So I turned my focus to the cousins, the uncles, the aunts. The ones who laughed the loudest at that dinner. I sent each of them a gift. For my uncle, a flash drive filled with evidence that my father had cheated him out of thousands in family investments. For my aunt, proof that the jewelry she wore, so proudly flaunted as heirlooms, was bought with laundered money. For Laura, my cousin who begged me to stop, I sent screenshots of private emails, her own mother plotting to sell her trust fund shares behind her back. One by one, I pulled the rug from under them. The effect was immediate. Calls turned into screaming matches. Family group chats exploded into accusations. My phone buzzed with fragments of chaos. She knew all along. Your father is a snake. Don't you dare blame this on me. And I sat there in my small apartment, surrounded by the soft hum of the city outside, sipping black coffee as if I were listening to a symphony written just for me. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl left out at the table. I was the conductor. Every note, every scream, every betrayal, they played exactly as I wanted. But revenge has a way of sharpening into something more. Because soon, I realized I wasn't just tearing them apart. I was rebuilding myself from the ashes they left me in. And nothing, not even their millions, could buy back what they lost. Their control. Their daughter. Their legacy. It was a Tuesday when the first knock came. Sharp. Urgent. The kind of knock that rattles the hinges. I didn't answer. I just watched through the peephole as my mother stood there, wrapped in a coat too fine for the season, her hair undone, her eyes hollow. She looked smaller than I remembered. She knocked again. Emily. Open the door. For a moment, I almost did. Almost let the daughter in me crack through the armor. But then I remembered her voice at the dinner table, cold and proud. You've never deserved it. I let the silence answer her instead. She stayed there for 10 minutes, muttering to herself, pacing, before finally leaving. Her perfume lingered in the hallway long after she was gone. I didn't cry. Not this time. That night, I made my next move. I sent a package to the mansion, my father's offshore bank records, printed and bound, tied with a silk ribbon. No note. No explanation. Just a mirror held up to his sins. By midnight, the house erupted. I parked across the street as always, headlights off, watching shadows fly across the windows. My father's rage was unmistakable, his silhouette pacing, fists slamming against walls. My mother's shrill voice cut through the night like broken glass. They weren't just fighting the world anymore. They were fighting each other. The next morning, I received a text. Unknown number. Just one sentence. Are you proud of this? I stared at it for a long time, then typed back. Yes. Because pride was all I had left. Later that week, my father called me himself. His voice was low, almost pleading. Emily, listen. Whatever you think you know, you don't understand how dangerous this is for all of us. For you. Stop this before it's too late. I let him speak. Let him beg. Then I asked. Was it dangerous when you all laughed at me? Silence. Heavy. Choking. Then I hung up. Word spread fast after that. My relatives weren't just panicking, they were turning on each other in public. At the club, at business meetings, even on social media. The facade shattered completely. Cousins blocked aunts. Uncles accused brothers. My family tree wasn't a tree anymore. It was firewood, splintering under its own flames. And me? I walked into the same restaurant where they humiliated me just weeks before. Alone. Ordered a glass of wine. Sat at the same long table, now empty, and whispered to myself. This seat was always mine. The waiter gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. The ghosts of their laughter couldn't touch me anymore. Because soon, they'd be begging for more than forgiveness. They'd be begging for survival. It's strange how power shifts. 1 month ago, I was invisible at their table. Now, I was the storm battering their gates. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters. Lawyers. Distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly desperate for answers. I ignored most of them, except for one call, my Aunt Catherine, the family's self-appointed queen. Her voice shook. Emily, you have to stop this. You don't know what you're doing. If they fall, we all fall. I closed my eyes, pictured her smirking face across the dinner table, champagne glass raised as my mother carved me out of existence. Yes, I whispered. That's the point. Click. That was the last time she called. By then, I had one final card left to play. My investigator had uncovered not just fraud, but something worse, illegal dealings tied to my father's partners overseas. Names, dates, wire transfers. Enough to not only ruin him, but to destroy the entire Carter legacy forever. I hesitated. Not out of mercy, but out of awe. This was it. The move that would turn their empire to dust. So I made the call. Sent the files. Not anonymously this time, boldly, directly. The agency knew my name now. The world would soon know it too. The fallout was instant. My father's company collapsed within days. Stockholders fled. Lawsuits piled high like storm waves. My mother's boutique shuttered overnight, windows dark, employees unpaid. The mansion that once glittered on the hill was suddenly crawling with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning in a funeral storm. And then came the image I'll never forget. My father, the man who once commanded rooms with nothing but silence, escorted out of his office in handcuffs. My mother, shielding her face from the cameras, screaming at the crowd. The same relatives who laughed at me now hid, their social media scrubbed, their voices quiet. None of them reached out, not to apologize, not to comfort. Fear had stolen their tongues. I sat on my balcony that night, watching the city lights flicker like stars, wine glass in hand. My phone rang again, unknown number. This time, I answered. Emily. My father's voice, hoarse, broken. Why? For a long moment, I didn't speak. I wanted him to sit in the silence, the same silence he gave me as my mother humiliated me. Finally, I said. Because you taught me what family means. And I learned it means nothing. He tried to respond, but the line cut out, maybe his signal dropped, maybe fate silenced him. Either way, it didn't matter. I had won. But as I looked out into the night, victory tasted bittersweet. Revenge gives you power, but it also leaves a hollow space where love used to live. Still, I knew one thing with certainty: tomorrow, I would end it. For good. Not with fury. Not with fire. But with justice. The kind they could never buy their way out of. The city slept in indifferent blue light, but inside me a long day of storms finally softened into something like dawn. I watched footage of my parents' arrests once, twice, not out of triumph, but to see the faces I'd known since childhood reduced to something human and small. The cameras had captured their power, the cameras had also captured their fall. After the dust settled, the questions began. Lawyers called to ask whether I wanted a cut of any recovered assets. Reporters wanted sound bites about vindication. Strangers congratulated me in DMs. I answered some things, declined others. Truth has weight, vanity is a cheap substitute. I could have taken everything. The law allowed some cold calculus, a percentage here, a fee there. But the house where I'd been humiliated once held memories that weren't all poison. Mrs. Alvarez, the housekeeper who'd ironed my mother's tablecloths for 20 years, lost her job when the boutique shuttered. The banquet chef, the night staff, the gardeners, real people with rent due and kids in school, had nothing to do with the deceit that built that gilded life. So I did the thing no one expected. I negotiated settlements that prioritized payroll and pensions. I worked with trustees and prosecutors to make sure money seized would protect the people who had been collateral damage. I set up a scholarship in my sister's name, because despite everything, she had taught me to read early on, and that small goodness deserved to be honored. People called it poetic. I called it necessary. Revenge is a teacher, but mercy is a lesson you give yourself. My parents lost more than money, they lost the certainty that once sustained them. I lost a family that once felt like skin. But in the hollow they left, I found a clearer shape of myself, no longer defined by their approval, no longer bent to their designs. I reclaimed the kitchen table I'd once been pushed from. I set a place for myself and filled it with people who chose to stay, a few genuine cousins who admitted their cowardice and worked to make amends, former employees I'd helped, and friends who had stood quietly by. At night I still heard echoes of the dinner, my mother's laugh, the clink of crystal, but the sound changed when I listened differently. It became a metronome marking time I'd survived. Time to build. Time to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I will not pretend I am unscarred. Some wounds keep reminding you where you came from. But scars also map how you moved through fire and did not disappear. I let go of the appetite for more ruin. I stopped counting the ways they had wronged me and started counting the small, steady things that made me whole again, a neighbor who brought over soup, a student who wrote to thank the scholarship, the quiet satisfaction of seeing a company pay severance it once refused. On the day the final hearings closed and the last trustee's stamp fell into place, I drove to the old estate one last time. The gates were open. The lawn was untended, wildflowers reclaiming cracked pathways. I walked to the porch and laid my palm against the wood where my mother used to place her hand in a mock of maternal warmth. It was rough beneath my fingers, real, not gilded. I didn't need to say anything. The world had spoken enough. I turned, walked back down the path, and felt something unwind inside me like a coil coming to rest.